Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35 scale Flakpanzer 5 Coelian. Unlike some of the other smaller scale builds which are listed on my video listings, in which those builds are built for commission and belong to a private collector, the model that you see here is built for my own collection and is not for sale and/or purchase. Like I often mention in these smaller scale videos, I often take on build commissions from scales ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. Unlike many of my other smaller scale builds, in which those builds are built mostly out of the box with maybe one or two little tweaks added to them, this model here did receive several extra additions, namely then aftermarket parts, as well as other components which were outside of the kit boundaries. We'll be going over these additions in this video. First, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. This vehicle here is the Flakpanzer 5 Coelian. The Coelian was a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun which was designed by the Germans during World War II. Shortly after the start of the war, the German military realized that they were vulnerable to low-flying fighter-bomber aircraft. The military needed a vehicle which can keep up with the infantry and with the tanks in order to provide umbrella protection against these low-flying threats, which were going to become a significant issue and problem as the war progressed. Throughout the course of the war, the Germans came up with several designs to fit this role, some of which utilized existing off-the-shelf chassis which were modified, and other vehicles featured their own special proprietary suspension and chassis type. The Coelian utilized the chassis of the Panther. There are also several examples of specially built flak tanks which utilize the Panzer IV chassis as well. What sets vehicles like the Coelian apart from some of the other German flak vehicles is that unlike the mobile wagon or even the 8-ton half-track with the flak gun fitted to it, the Coelian has a crew that is fully encased and protected inside of the armored vehicle. This was facilitated with a rotating turret as well as the Panther's hull. By the use of the Panther's hull, the Coelian would have more than enough mobility to keep up with the German tanks and the infantry. Another advantage about utilizing the Panther's chassis was that at this point of the war, the Panther's design was basically perfected, and most of the bugs that plagued the Panther by this point have been worked out. In addition to the reliability of the base chassis, the use of the Panther also utilized a lot of off-the-shelf components, which for maintenance as well as for just supply and logistics reasons was also an advantage, as opposed to designing a vehicle from the ground up, which would have required more time, resources, and would have had minimum parts interconnectivity with the other vehicles of the period. The vehicle featured a newly designed rotating turret with a high elevation capacity gun. The two guns that were going to be used were the 3.7 centimeter Flak 43s. The turret itself and the whole concept was designed by Rheinmetall. However, the design never entered production. A wooden mock-up was produced and was placed on a Panther D chassis for testing purposes. However, due to the raw material shortages, as well as the lack of any spare Panther hulls, as at this time in the war, Panther hulls were really a short commodity and were desperately needed as Panthers, the vehicle never entered production. In order to aim the guns and hit the target, the vehicle utilized optics. There were no electronic means of doing this, i.e. radar or any other type of sensors which would be developed much later after World War II. The Commander did have a optical rangefinder, which was the standard optical rangefinder which was used by the Germans throughout the war. What's interesting about the Coelian concept is that after the war, the need to have a vehicle that provides air protection from low-flying aircraft that can keep up with the ground forces became something that all of the world's militaries were going to be interested in. This would lead to vehicles such as the Gepard from West Germany, the Schlieke from the Soviet Union, as well as the Dividad project, which led up to the Sergeant York in the United States, which is a whole nother discussion in itself. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get an idea on what the base starter kit supplied you with. And here's the model just prior to the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this old vintage Dragon 1/35 scale Flakpanzer 4 Coelian Flakpanzer kit. The kit itself is a vintage model kit. This model kit you see here, I purchased it off of eBay back in 2002 when I was actually still in high school, and the model has been sitting in my stash ever since, so it's a good time that I actually get around to it and starting it. As you can see, there has been some surface dust on the box, as it has been loitering around the shop for a while. The kit itself dates back to 1996. These kits here were released by Dragon, and Dragon at the time also released several other very unique Panther variations, from their Panther Gs to, I believe, also a Jag Panther at the time. It's also important to note out that Dragon has constantly retooled and re-released different variations of their Panther kits, so the tooling on this is going to be considered a lot more primitive compared to some of the newer tooling that's found on Dragon kits of today. However, having said that, these old school Dragon kits also are very nicely detailed for what they are. The kit here, I believe I paid about 20 bucks for it on eBay, and as for this version, this kit here is long since out of production, and however could possibly still be found on eBay. I believe that this kit here has also been re-released several times by Dragon under the brand Shanghai Dragon, as well as I believe possibly even one of the Orange Box Cyber Hobby exclusives. As for the box and graphic design, see here a nice painting of the Coelian with a burning King Tiger in the back, as well as I believe a Sturmovik that was shot down by the Flakpanzer. All in all, the graphic design is very nicely done and is illustrated by Vince, who did a lot of these early style Dragon box arts from this period. The rest of the graphic design is typical of the Dragon Imperial series kits of the period. Here, the Tauk Panzer III that they also released, and some pictures of their build model. Cracking open the box takes us to the interior. I have here two sets of rubber tracks. These were not part of this kit, and I'll be going over these in a little bit. As you can see, the components are your standard Dragon gray plastic parts of the period. Now, this kit here does borrow a lot of runners from the other Dragon contemporary Panther kits, namely the Panther II, as well as their Jag Panther. Many of these components will not be utilized for this build and will be placed in the spare parts bin, and this is a common feature for Dragon kits of the period and even today. So this component here features a lot of the Panther II King Tiger style components. This runner here is of the turret. This is obviously all going to be used on the Coelian. As you can see, the barrels are solid and can be dremeled out for more accuracy. However, I believe I will be replacing these with aluminum barrels from aftermarket sources.
The rest of the detailing, though, looks pretty good. This runner here looks like to be from a Jag Panther due to the mantlet. Sponson detailing. More Jag Panther parts. These are road wheels. These are the rubber rimmed variants. Other sprocket and idler options. Getting down to the box takes us to some steel wheel variations, as well as the tank's track. Now, this being a vintage Dragon kit, like all Dragon kits of the period, for the tracks they utilize the link and length track system. If anyone is a frequent viewer of my videos, you will know that I have an utmost disdain for this style of track, and in my opinion, link and length track is a cancer on the armor modeling community. In its place, I will be utilizing a set of vinyl tracks here from Tamiya. These tracks here were purchased off of eBay many years ago, and were specifically purchased for this build. The tracks are good quality. For the medium, they are Tamiya, like I said before, and the Tamiya tracks should and will mate and time well with the Dragon components. Going deeper takes us to the upper and lower hulls. As you can see, this kit here has the suspension all molded in one piece on the tub, kind of reminiscent of the old school Tamiya kits. And as one might imagine, Dragon has retooled these components many times to feature more accurate, individual suspension pieces. However, should make for a decent build nonetheless. The upper body does have its proper weld beads and hull sections, and duct interior or faux interior detailing. As for the instruction manual, as you see, a lot of blued out components. Other than that, the build looks to be pretty straightforward and will make for an interesting piece. And towards the bottom of the box takes us to the model's decal sheet. There are some very basic markings. The other Dragon kits of the period that I have built and used the kit supply decals, appear to be a decent quality, and from the other builds have went on with very smooth with no issues. I expect the same for the type of quality that I'm seeing here. Starting with the model's running gear, all of the sprocket, row wheels, and idler detailing that you see here is all stock from the DML kit. It was also assembled out of box with absolutely no tweaks or mods needed to have been added to the following components. Like I mentioned in the unboxing, for the tank's track utilizes a single piece vinyl rubber track from Tamiya. The track was a complete drop-in installation, and absolutely no mods were needed to have been made to either the sprocket or any of the other running gear components. The sprocket's timing matched absolutely dead on perfect with the Tamiya track, as well as the wheel spacing worked perfectly with the gaps between the teeth on the Tamiya track as well. By switching out the stock Dragon Lincoln Length track with the single piece vinyl track from Tamiya, the build not only went by a lot faster, but smoother, and in my opinion, the rubber tracks are way better than the individual static Lincoln Length style track. Now, if anyone is watching that wants to replace the track with other options. Like I mentioned before, there are several options of Panther track available, from workable track links from manufacturers like Frulli model. Those tracks would also be a great addition to add to this stock kit as well. Moving our way to the rear portion of the vehicle, all of the rear detailing that you see here is stock Dragon. Everything was assembled out of box and went together without any headaches. One area to point out is that of the blackout light. As you can see, I went ahead and painted these small little lenses with the green paint. This is due to the light being represented in the blackout mode. This is molded this way on the Dragon kit, and by simply painting the little lenses with the green paint greatly helps the look of the build, as opposed to just simply leaving it painted with the tank's overall base color and weathering. Moving towards the exhaust manifolds are also stock Dragon. This being a lathe Panther G body, the tank supplies you with the lathe style cylindrical diffuser style exhaust. This would be appropriate again for a Panther G of this generation. The exhausts that come with the Dragon kit are nicely detailed out of box, considering the age of the kit. As for the paint and weathering, they are weathered with my usual rust and exhaust soot, which is typically found on my other builds. They were assembled out of box, like I mentioned before, but again, no hiccups or any type of issues. Moving on from the back takes us to first the spare track rack. Just like with all Panthers, on the rear portion of the vehicle, there are racks on both sides for the storage of spare track. The spare track that you see here were the kit supplied Lincoln length versions. Being coupled together in two pairs, they were a lot more manageable compared to assembling an entire length for the main track itself. The pieces were simply painted, weathered, and mounted to the vehicle with no mods needed. The rest of the side detailing is also stock Dragon, from the cleaning rod tube to the Pioneer tools, as well as the side fender mounts. And again, everything is stock on the reverse side as well. One bit of aftermarket accessory that can be added to this model that could also help the builder make the kit pop a little bit more is the addition of an aftermarket tow cable, which would be mounted in the typical locations found on Panthers. This is true for the two main tow cables, as well as the track removal cable, which was usually spooled in this section here. For the purposes of my model, however, it wasn't necessary. Special attention needs to be paid on these older kits to the side skirt mounts and front fenders. The side skirt mounts are designed in a way that they are reversible on the runner, and for this location here, you need to remove a small section of the mount in order to mount on the shovel. These are illustrated in the instructions, and there is a small little indentation molded on the bottom portion of the side skirt mount for the modeler to remove. This is something that's not necessarily done on contemporary kits, but is found on some of these older generation ones. The removal of the material was pretty straightforward, but is one that needs to be done with care by the modeler, as it can easily be oversanded and possibly broken during the removal phase. If that occurs, it's going to lead to a little bit of difficulties in repairing and replacing the components. So special care is going to be required. As for the detailing found on the front, this is all stock Dragon. The Bosch light is a nice piece and it's nicely represented. It is a hollow component, which makes for a nice little detailing in that the slit is molded hollow and does have depth to it compared if the piece was molded solid. As for the bow MG34, the bow MG34 is very simplistic in terms of today's tooling. However, the stock gun does do an adequate job in my opinion. One modification that I made was that with a small micro Dremel bit, I went ahead and drilled out the muzzle end of the barrel. Now, like I frequently mention, this procedure is very risky and should only be done by someone that has not only the steady hand and experience in doing small work like this, but also with the tools required. You will need a Dremel with a very, very steady spindle, as well as a very fine micro drill bit in order to drill out something of such precision. If both of those factors are not had by the builder, this procedure is definitely not recommended, as you can easily screw up the component and thus destroying it. Now, in case anyone does break or ruin their gun barrel, a replacement MG34 in 1/35 scale is not difficult to track down. However, it's something to keep in mind. Now you have to not only have the extra costs and the extra time in waiting for the component to arrive from overseas. Moving our way to the engine deck. Being a late style Panther G, you will have a late style Panther G engine deck with engine deck detailing. This is one portion of the build that needed to have been added with aftermarket parts, as the stock original kit did not include lots of these little details. The details that I'm referring to is that of the meshwork found on the grill's covers. The meshwork that you see here was a aftermarket set from Aber. The set was purchased through eBay through the following vendor. The vendor as well as the Aber kit number are listed below, as well as in the video listing. The Aber set is actually designed for a Tamiya Panther G. However, it was a direct replacement and drop-in install onto this Dragon counterpart. None of the components needed to be adjusted or fiddled with in order to make the switch from Tamiya to Dragon. The set comes with the 4 mesh covers that you see here for the box grills, as well as the 2 fan grill covers and cover components. In addition to those components, the meshwork for the air intake on the center portion here of the grill was also included. Also included, but was not used, was that of the sliding grill covers, which would be mounted over these grills in the back. In addition to all those details, one portion of the set that was greatly appreciated was the fact that the set came with the grill cutoff flaps. The late Panther G features a stand-up style fan guard, which acts as a duct that brings cool air not only into the radiators, but also into the engine bay. This is found on the later versions of the Panther G, and is a staple of the Panther family. The way you see the model here, these flaps are in the storage mode. There's a small receptacle and mount that keeps everything stowed in this place here. Whenever the crew would want to plate over and cover up this component here, these little blades would simply click into small little mounts that are found on this ring, thus sealing off partially or fully the fan guard. Now, one nice trait about the Aber kit is the fact that if you notice, the fan guard is 3-dimensional. It's not a 2-piece affair. The way this was done was that it's comprised out of several pieces of very thin and fine photo etch. Now, this component is probably the hardest part to assemble of the photo etch set, as it's also one of the most important. You can try to assemble the piece with super glue. However, in my experience, the super glue bond will not be very durable and will be somewhat problematic. The way I recommend and the way it's done on this model here is that everything is soldered together with a very fine soldering iron and very fine hands. You can go ahead and assemble everything nice and neatly in the way I have it here. With the use of solder, the piece is permanent and it is a lot more durable and will last a lot longer compared to the super glue method. Once it is fully assembled, the piece really helps the model pop compared to the stock non-meshed offering. Moving our way to the tank's antenna base. The antenna base that you see here is stock Dragon. The stock kit does supply you with a pretty decent antenna base. The antenna base features the elevated mount the rubber insulator, and a small little stubby bit of antenna. The little bit of wire, or the little molded in section, was easily broken off during the build, and to replace it with a full antenna with a micro Dremel bit, I drilled out the center portion of the antenna base and mounted on a wire. If we notice here, the top portion of the wire that emerges from the antenna base is painted in gold. Just like you see on my 1/6 scale builds, on the section here of the antenna on the real German tanks, it would be brass. A little drop of gold paint gives the illusion of the little brass section, and the 1/35 scale helps also making with the tank pop with the detailing. Moving our way to the front portion of the vehicle takes us to the bump stops for the hatches. This is one area to point out, as it is a common area overlooked by many modelers. On the Panther G with the side opening hatches, the bump stops are comprised out of 2 rubber blocks which are bolted to the top deck. With a quick little swipe of black paint, helps make the rubber blocks pop and stand out from the model's paintwork. While on talking about things that make the model pop, on the front portion here of the kit there are 2 bow periscopes. They are inserts and are part of the kit and are nicely detailed. With a quick little swipe of gloss black on the lenses, really again makes them stand out compared to the standard kit if it's just painted and left in stock colors. One distinguishing factor that this is a Coelian compared to the standard Panther G is that of the travel lock. Many Panther fans will notice that the travel lock is very different compared to the standard 75mm gun lock. This is again due to the fact that this vehicle is a Flakpanzer compared to a standard Panther G. Moving our way to the tank's turret. The turret that you see here is the stock kit turret and assembles again very quickly and very easily. Not a whole lot of fitting was required in mating of the 2 components. On the tank's turret there is an option, and that involves that of the hatch. As you can see, my hatch is in the closed state. However, if the hatch is modeled in the open state, there is a small little optical telescopic bar which gets mounted in this location over here. This detail is only present when the hatch is in the open state. Since the hatch is closed, the optical bar is not present. Moving on to the gun mount itself, the gun and its trunnion is fully pivotable. It can go up and down in a high angle, which one would expect for that of a vehicle that's designed to shoot down airplanes. Now, this is all built out of the box. There's no mods made to this mechanism here. However, it is important to note that after prolonged usage and pivoting of the gun in its mount, the piece will begin to loosen up. One addition that I made to the model was that on the interior portion, to help keep everything nice and stiff for a prolonged period of time, I added a drop of white glue to the actual pivot points. The white glue hardens and is not strong enough to permanently lock the gun in its place like something like super glue or even model glue, but it's strong enough to give it a little bit of friction that prevents the gun from drooping if the barrels are moved very frequently. The turret, as you can see, can rotate 360 degrees and rotates very, very smooth. Now, this is one portion of the build that had to have been modified from the kit original. The kit original turret is designed not to have any locks and simply mounts to the hull with gravity. This is found on several kits and in the past, and as well as even some kits today. One modification that I made was the ability of the turret to be locked on to the tank's body. The way this was done was I fabricated turret locks on the bottom portion here of the turret. The locks are typically found on most 1/35 scale and larger tank model kits. They're fabricated out of 2 pieces of plastruct angle, and they're simply mounted to the bottom portion of the turret. Small little cutouts needed to have been made to the bottom of the turret in order to mount on the angle. In addition to the angle mounted to the turret, on the hull I went ahead and made corresponding cutouts for the pieces to lock on and rotate. This was simply added with a needle file. It's a very simple addition, but one that does help the model, as a locked-on turret is a lot better than a turret that can easily pop off and cause damage. Just like with all other model tank kits, the turret can only be removed from the hull if the turret is in a certain orientation. Moving away to the model's flak guns. The flak guns that you see on this model here are aftermarket components. Rather than utilizing the plastic barrels that came with the kit, I simply swapped them out with two aftermarket barrels from RB model. The RB model barrels were acquired off of eBay from the following vendor, and the vendor and the item number are listed below and below in the video listing. The RB model sets comprise out of two components. You have the aluminum barrel, and you have a brass one-piece flash suppressor. Both components are CNC made and are exquisitely done and nicely detailed. On the flash suppressor, all of the holes as well as the vents are all milled away and are present. In comparison, the kit barrels are over here. As you can see, unlike the metal barrels, which are all hollow, the kit barrels are totally solid. Now, if you have enough patience and skill, you can theoretically hollow out the cones and drill out everything, making them in similar spec to the aluminum ones. However, it was just simpler to go ahead and just swap out the kit one for the metal ones that you see here. In order to mount the metal ones to the kit, the only modification that was needed was to drill out more of the plastic in which the barrel plugs in. As the kit barrel ends are slightly shorter than the ones found on the RB model. With a Dremel bit of the same size, I just bored out a little bit more material, and the barrels were a simple drop-in install. Moving on to the paint and markings. As for the model's camouflage, the model is painted with your standard German 3-tone ambush paint scheme. As for the markings, the vehicle did supply you with a decal sheet. The decal sheet itself was lifted from another Dragon kit, namely that of the grille. Of the decals that are on the sheet, only 3 are utilized for this kit here, and that is of the German crosses. You have 2 crosses in the front, which are covered up with the equipment, and a 3rd cross found on the rear storage bin. The decals were good quality and were a problem-free installation. The model itself turned out very well in my opinion. It was a nice quick build, and the only thing I had to wait for was the arrival of the aftermarket barrels and the PE. Once all those components were on hand, the model slid very quickly from build to completion. As for a skill level recommendation, this kit here I really recommend for someone of an intermediate to an advanced skill range. The reason I say that is that theoretically the kit was actually very, very simple in nature. The hull, turret, and the basic out-of-the-box detailing is quite simple and can be built by a beginner. The caveat comes with that of the track. The stock Dragon track is way too difficult for a novice builder to attempt on his own, and in my opinion should really be swapped out for either rubber tracks like I did here or workable track links. With rubber tracks, the build goes together very quickly and very smoothly. With workable tracks, the same thing. However, the workable tracks do require a little bit more of a skill set in order to pin and get everything together. The subject matter of the kit itself is a very unique piece and makes for a nice addition to any collection. I definitely recommend this kit for anyone who is a fan of German World War II armor, as well as a fan of the Panther series, as well as flak tanks in general. Being a vintage kit, tracking one down will not be as easy as tracking down a more recent release. These kits, however, can be found online, namely on eBay, as well as you might be lucky enough to find one stashed away in your local hobby shop. As for this build here, like I mentioned before, this build I've had in the stash since 2002 when I was actually still in high school, and it's actually great to finally see it assembled, painted, weathered, and it can finally be put on display with the rest of my collection. Another really nice advantage about this vehicle is the fact that since the lower chassis is that of a late Panther G, there is a humongous infrastructure of detail aftermarket parts on the scene. Anything from replacement wheels, track, exhaust, tools, equipment, you name it. With the addition of all of these extra parts, the builder can really super detail this vehicle into something special. And that concludes this model showcase video for this Flakpanzer 5 Coelian flak tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.